Question number one. How does Kamala Wijeratne portray the victimization and pathetic consequences of war? Explain with reference to her poem. Introduction paragraph. The first sentence in the introduction paragraph. The poems A Soldier Wife Monument and musical written by the Sri Lankan author Kamala Wijeratne reveals the shocking impacts of the long-lasted war in the country. The second sentence of the introduction paragraph. Through these poems, the writer portrays the innocent victims and their suffering as they were part of the conflict. The third sentence of the introduction paragraph. Let's analyze them in detail in the following paragraphs. Body part of the answer. Kamala Wijeratne illustrates the pathetic feeling of the victims throughout her three literary works. According to that, the very first stanza of the poem, The Soldier's Wife Weeps, highlights the scare feeling aroused in the mind of the ordinary woman, and also she portrays how much dependent people struggle in their life to live in a Sri Lankan society. Similarly, in the poem Monument, the writer shows the typical bus journey which encounters the memory of the soldiers who died in the jogs of war. And also, the writer highlights the changes that occur after the war, physically and psychologically, among the victims. Same as the above two poems, the another poem, musical, which the title seems plural, that showcases the multiple deaths in single village because of the war. The title of the poem reveals the aesthetic memory, but the subject of the poem portrays the pathetic condition of a war. How a young man isolated from his routine life. Among the above three literary works, Kamala Wijeratne highlights the pathetic consequences and the sufferings of the affected people by handling various poetic devices in her works. The writer highlights the pathetic situation in the poem A Soldier Wife Weeps. She shows how the war destroys innocent people's hope and belief. This is evident through the line, But on Thursday when they bore you home. From the above line, she proved how the war changed everything in a single second. The writer uses the alliteration technique in order to talk about her thought towards her future without her husband. Even though she do not have any aware of the lifestyle without husband, she thinks about her husband future with her partner. Moreover, the writer uses metaphor swaying through a desert. The line used to compare her life with the road in between the desert. The struggle and the pains she faced in the future has showcased the victimization of the character by the above lines. The writer show how the characters victimized while recalling their memory. The line it is evident through the fourth and the fifth stanza of the poem. Similarly, the writer uses the same theme on her another poem, Monument, in detail. It is also reveals the pathetic condition of the civil war. Here, the writer uses the capitalization in memory of my son. This reveals the pathetic impacts of war. The memory of their son, which indirectly emphasizing the parents are alive after the death of their children in the battlefield. The writer portrays how war separates family through the fifth stanza of the poem. They would have flocked. This line emphasizes the soldiers who were in battlefield. They were isolated from their family, society, and from all the happiness in their precious life. This is also proved through the usage of alliteration technique served and steaming in the last line of the same stanza. The writer not failed to express the sufferings of the parents physically and psychologically. She victimized the characters by the diction Bandara, demonstrating the experts in agriculture, and due to the war, the generation finished with them. The line, a farmer in a muddied and loincloth unsmeared, showing how the parent suffers and remain helplessly due to the war. The diction unshed tears depicting the hurts and pain of the victims in the poem, and also the diction muddied loincloth emphasizing the poverty level of the people who loses their children in the jobs of war. Like in Soldiers, White Weeps and Monument, the writer discusses the tragedy of war and her main focuses is the restriction of innocent youth and who fight in the battlefield. The diction drummed expresses the auditory imagery of the soldiers who feel happy but their life is on a valley of death. And also the diction long conveyed past, showing the reality of a soldier's life because they do not have any assurance about their life. The writer symbolically compares the soldier's life with the diction cage parrot because they do not have any love or freedom in their life. The author showcasing how the soldiers counting their days for the dead. This is evident through the line, I knew their days were numbered. The writer uses repetition in her poem and the trunks turn to the north. It represents the society that symbolically expresses the soldiers went to the war zone. This also showcasing the intensity of death which soldiers are faced. And the conclusion. In conclusion, the poems A Soldier Wife Weeps, Monuments and Musical, written by Sri Lankan poetess Kamala Wijeratne, conveys the message of how the victim suffers due to the war and how the war creates pathetic situation among the victims. The faith, hope are destroyed by the war. The war brings sufferings and separation, and also it affects the hopeless life. The end. Thank you.
Question number 1. How does Kamala Wijeratne portray the victimization or pathetic consequences of war? Explain with reference to her poem. Introduction paragraph. Sentence number 1. The poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps, Monuments, and musical written by the Sri Lankan author Kamala Wijeratne reveals the shocking impacts of the long-lasted war in the country. Second sentence. Through these poems, the writer portrays the innocent victims and their sufferings as they were part of the conflicts. Third sentence. Let's analyze them in detail in the following paragraphs. Body part of the answer. These three poems commonly explore the impact of the civil war in Sri Lanka. The direct victims of the civil war is disclosed in the poem musical, while the other two poems describe indirect victims and their suffering. In the poem musical, the speakers feel some anxiety about the young soldiers who are going to sacrifice uh, their lives for the country and the uncertainty of the soldiers. While the poem Monuments talks about the pathetic condition of the parents who lost their soldier's son in the battlefield. It is similar to the poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps, where the speaker talks about the suffering and worries of a widow who lost her soldier husband in the war zone. The poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps narrates in the first person point of view, and the speaker is at home. The poem starts with a flashback that her husband is returning over the vacation. I watched until you disappear over the bench, and long after until my breath gave a great haste. Through these lines, the writer expresses the wife's true feelings of her husband is leaving from her. And also, the poet has used simple past tense to talk about the past events that she used to do when her husband returns for vacation. Further, these two lines disclose that how the separation between the husband and wife affects them psychologically. Similarly, the poem Monuments describes how parents lost and suffer their young children in the war zone. The poet is traveling in a bus and witnesses several monuments with a soldier's name carved in them. The poet does not see only one monument, but repeatedly see the various legends in different buttons. In memory of my son, I got a jolt. Through this line, the writer reveals that the pathetic condition of the indirect war victim, as the soldiers are young, unlikely their parents get a way to make a tribute to their sons. The parents, the Dixon sons, highlights the monument was made by his parents. It shows the indirect victim's pathetic condition. In the world order, parents don't wish to see their children's death, but in this case, it is paradoxical to the society. And also, the writer has used capitalization through the line to emphasize the pathetic impact of the war and suffering of the parents. On the other hand, the poem musical talks about the direct victims in the war zone. Even though the title shows the pleasant feeling, the subject of the poem is sadness. It is evident when the speaker says, "A long line of caged parrots I saw one day in a pet shop." Through these lines, the writer pictures the reality of young soldiers in their existence. Further, it indicates how they were restricted from their freedom. She has symbolically referred the soldiers to the caged parrots. And also the Dixon one day recalls an incident the speaker encountered one day in a pet shop, which indicates the effectiveness of the flashback technique in the poem. Further, the Dixon cage brings out the theme of liberation and freedom of the soldiers effectively. Furthermore, the repetition of the term, the tracks trundle to the north, emphasizes the risk of the battlefield where the soldiers are heading towards it. The Dixon note symbolically refers to the war zone, and also the writer shows that they are going to the battlefield without any fear. It shows the bravery of the young youth in the society. However, it is interesting that the speaker prays for both sides who involved in the war. In conclusion, Kamala Wijeratne criticizes the war, which destroyed both the lives of soldiers who are directly involved in the war and also the lives of their beloved ones who are indirectly involved in the war through these 3 points. The end. Thank you.
Question number 1, introduction paragraph. First sentences of introduction paragraph. Question number 1. How does Kamala Wijeratne portrays the victimization and pathetic consequences of war? Explain with relevance of her poem. Introduction paragraph. First sentence of introduction paragraph. The poems A Soldier's Wife Weep, Monuments and Musical written by the Sri Lankan author Kamala Wijeratne reveals the shocking impacts of the long-lasted war in the country. Second sentence of introduction paragraph. Through these poems, the writer portrays the innocent victims and their suffering as they were the parts of the conflicts. Third sentence of introduction paragraph. Let's analyze them in detail in the following paragraphs. Body part of the answer. First, the writer writes the poem. A soldier's wife weeps in her participation and also highlights how the people depend on soldier and how much they get struggle and suffer without his absence for life. The writer portrays many dictions and poetic devices for point out her inner feelings. The lines saw things in her head between life and death. Through this line, the writer emphasizes that she got disappointed and unable to expect because of his husband's death. Even though the wife has portrayed as a
indirect victim, and the soldier has depicted as a direct victim of her poem. Soldier's wife weeps. As the same in the poem, Manumans, the direct victims are the young soldiers and the indirect victims are the people, parents, who suffers mentally as well as physical because of the absence of their young children. Furthermore, the writer portrays the multiple deaths through her poem titled Monument, and also writer uses capitalization in her poem Monument in order to express pathetic impact of war, and the writer indirectly says that parents alive and children died. In memory of my son, through this line indirectly emphasize how that parents suffer and get pain when they saw death of their children. In addition, the proofs in the poem Soldier's Wife Weeps, demonstrating the failures faced by the soldier's wife because of her husband's death. So the writer uses as a simile like a plane, and the writer portrays as a metaphor drawn of voices. These both techniques are speaking about two stages of human life and death. And also, the poet explores as a technique alliteration in through the line I think of the barren years. Meanwhile, the writer explores the victimization in the poem Monument through the diction Unshed Tears, which shows the parents have physically and psychologically broke because of their loved ones, and the diction Fell is also notable in the poem, as it leaves a concept of praising soon after failing. Moreover, the poet indicates how the victims affected due to the war in the poem Soldier's Wife Weeps. So the writer uses the technique retrospection, which is used to look back or recall her memory when she was with her husband. The diction brought together and hung behind me and my hair. These are indicated how she feels and gets hurt because of her husband's unexpected death. It is showing the sufferings of the indirect victims of the poem, like as same in the poem Monuments, the writer explores the indirect victims suffering through the line followed their fathers. It shows the suffering parents who lost their children in a battlefield. If they alive, their parents would not get worried, and also in their very old age, they don't go for work. Next, the writer depicts the poem musical unfolds the tragedy of war as young men towards the battlefield. And also, the poem attempts to feature a usual image of carrying soldiers in trucks during the war scenario in Sri Lanka. The term green-brown helped the readers visualize the soldiers who were wearing their military uniforms. Meanwhile, the writer indicates these men as soldiers with the term troops of youth. The diction truck in the third stanza shows in which the soldier travel towards their destination. The diction singing and happy are correlated with the theme of happiness of the young man in the task assigned at the same time, it indicates how they are fearless for the dangerous life they are heading on. And also, poet uses techniques for decorate this poem, the line and sang their songs and beat their boots its rhythm. Through this, the writer uses the repetition as a technique, and also the poet uses the rhyming as a technique. Through these, Lord, road, walls, halls. In conclusion, the poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps, Monument and musical written by Sri Lankan poet Kamala Wijeratne conveys the message how the victim suffers due to the war, and the war brings lots of unexpected sufferings and separation. The end. Thank you.
Question number 1. How does Kamala Wijeratne portray the victimization pathetic consequence of war? Explain with reference to the poems. Introduction paragraph. Sentence 1. The poems A Soldier's Wife Weeps, Monuments and Musical, written by the Sri Lankan author Kamala Wijeratne, reveals the shocking impacts of the long-lasted war in the country. Second sentence of the introduction paragraph. Through these poems, the writer portrayed the innocent victims and their suffering as they were the parts of the conflict. Third sentence. Let's, let's analyze them in detail in the following paragraph. Body part. In the poem, A Soldier's Wife Weeps, the writer reveals sad and pathetic feelings of the woman after her husband's death. In each and every line, writer depicts her love, concern, and her sincere affection towards her husband. And lit lamp before the Buddha no end. The above line illustrates how the woman gives priority and love towards her husband. She endlessly prays for her loving husband. She doesn't have any biggest expectation. She has only one desire to be with her husband. It is evident that anyone cannot be replaced her husband's place. It is similar to that Kamala Wijeratne's another poem, Monuments, shows the psychological depression of parents due to the loss of their young children in the war. The writer discusses different beliefs on her poems. In the poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps, the indirect victim wife has astrological beliefs. I had no fears. I knew you were safe. I had your horoscope read. The above line evident to that on Wednesday there are two signs are happened as bad omens. When she prayed for her husband and she consulted astrological through her through her behavior, we can understand the woman blindly believes astrological prediction. On the other hand, the poem musical shows the same aspect. The gods protect you. It is another evidence that poet is religious person. The writer has used various techniques on her poems to picturize the pathetic consequence of war. In the poem, A Soldier's Wife Weeps, the writer has used diction Saturday, indicates past events of the couple, and also another diction Horuva shows Sri Lankan culture. Moreover, the author has used metaphor tone of voices, emphasizes the widow's condition, and the similes like a plane and like a road swing through the desert refers her dark future. In addition, the writer has used capitalization in the title of the poem Monuments. It is the plural form informs multiple deaths in single village. And the another capitalization in of my son indicates memory of dead soldier who died in the battlefield. Moreover, the poet has used the visual imagery patterns of the road. Through this imagery, the readers can imagine the typical bus journey of Sri Lanka in their word eyes. The writer has used personification, the inscription of the white walls. It is evident how the people suffer after their loved one's death. Furthermore, in her poem Musical, at the beginning the poet has used went as a diction which is symbolized the soldiers. Another diction note indicates the war show which is closely correlates where the people life in dangers. And also the diction green wood picturize the normal society. In addition, the writer has used visual imagery green-brown to indicate the physical appearance of the soldier. Another imagery, caged parrots, explores the condition of the soldier. It is one of the description how the soldiers are live their life. And the writer has used the auditory imagery trumped. It describes the typical attitude of the young people. They don't know the fear of the death, the repetition, the truck turned to the north. This ideology is similar to the perception of English writer Alfred Lord Tennyson. As he mentioned the battlefield, he describes it as valley of death and jaw of death. In, in conclusion, all the three poems of Kamala Wijeratne speaks about the war and its consequence. Through her lines, we can understand how much the war creates victims, direct and indirect. And also we can understand how much the author becomes and one of the victim because of the war. The end. Thank you.
Question number 1. How does Kamala Wijeratne portray the victimization, pathetic consequences of war? Explain with reference to her poems. Introduction paragraph. First sentence. The poems A Soldier's Wife Weeps, Monument and Musical written by the Sri Lankan author Kamala Wijeratne reveal the shocking impacts of the long-lasting war in the country. Second sentence. Through these poems, the writer portrays the innocent victims and their suffering as they were the parts of the conflict. Third sentence. Let's analyze them in detail in the following paragraph. Body part of the answer. Furthermore, the poem A Soldier's Wife Weeps explores to affect normal life after war. Through a woman's feelings about when her soldier husband was dead in the battlefield. This poem reveals clearly sad and pathetic feelings of the woman after the burial of her dead husband. But on Thursday, now I am seen to see things I never saw before. These lines, she recalls to her the times they were together, her burial. So loving and full of care and woman's feelings suddenly changed to her dead husband is. The writer highlights the miserable state of woman soldiers' wives suffering after the death of her husband. In this poem, Weep Diction reveals the tragedy woman faced many problems in her life. It's evidence of auditory imagery. On the other hand, the auditory imagery highlights facts of the poem, the extract imagery of a Sri Lankan soldier's wife, widowed at young age. Secondly, the Kamala Wijeratne poem Monument discusses how parents lost their young children at war. She talks about the after of the civil war that excited between two ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. In memory of my son, this line shows the memory of the soldiers' children after death. The writer used capitalization also because she emphasizes pathetic feelings through the line. The speaker is traveling in a bus, encounters number of monuments and recalls the days of war. Its journey of the bus reflected pathetic condition of the war. Moreover, Kamala Wijeratne in the poem Musical exposes the tragedy of war and her focus is innocent Jews who fight in war. In this poem, illustrates the way the poet worries about the young man's fate. In their green-brown uniforms, these lines bring out visual imagery and it similarly indicates soldiers' uniform, danger and smartness. The diction, staged parrots, reveals compare the condition of soldiers. These young men's days too are numbered. Thus, Kamala Wijeratne talks about the tragedy of war and the loss of innocent Jewish soldiers.
In conclusion, the three poems are based on different themes. Similarly, these three poems have been taken under the war concept. The first poem highlights the situation of widowed wife is put into and her mentality. Secondly, the poem musical talks about the uncertainty of the soldier's life. The last one, Monument, talks about discuss how parents lost their young children at war. It's overall these three poems about war, but uses the theme of war to discuss other social issues and effects. The end. Thank you.